All right, I think we're going to start. Welcome, everyone. I'm Roseanne Cook, one of the founders and facilitators of Potluck Insurgency here in Johnson County. Since we have a lot of new folks with us tonight, I did want to take a moment to talk about Potluck Insurgency. We started in January of 2017 following the election of Donald Trump. A group of us met and decided to do what we could to combat the policies of the Trump administration. So we were expecting bad things, but of course, at the time, little did we know how terrible the Trump administration would be and continues to be for our democracy. So we have been going for about 6 years here in Johnson County. Our mission is broad but simple. We support the values and policies of the Democratic Party, and we seek to help elect Democrats at all levels of government. We've organized many meet and greets over the last 6 years, as well as fundraisers for Democratic candidates, including a number running for president and the US House and Senate, as well as numerous candidates for state offices. We've also sponsored many speakers on topics of interest to Democrats in our community. I think we serve as a complement to the County Democratic Party by organizing events that give Democrats who are not part of the county party structure a place to talk about issues and policies, as well as a place to meet interesting speakers and candidates. Many of our gatherings over the past 6 years have been in person, and as our name implies, they have included some truly delicious potluck meals. But we've also enjoyed doing events on Zoom. It allows us to incorporate speakers who might not be able to travel the distance to come here and speak at an in-person event. And of course, it allows us to have many folks like you who don't live nearby us here in Johnson County. I think that we have played an important role here in Johnson County. We have a very strong county party structure here, but I think we've been able to even go beyond what they are able to do. So I did want to say that if any of you here tonight from outside Johnson County would be interested in forming a similar group, if you think you have Democrats that might benefit from or welcome an opportunity to get together in an informal setting like ours, I'd be very happy to talk with you about our programming and how we manage our affairs. We have a steering committee of, I think, 8 people at this point, most of whom are here tonight. Ed Cranston, who let you in, Jane Cranston, who will be on the program tonight, Senator Janice Weiner, Jackie Blank, Sarah Prinius, Emily Silliman, Jean Bancroft, and I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. Tell me if I am. So our program tonight is, as you know, you're here, I'm sure, because you're very concerned about this terrible legislation that's pending in the Iowa legislature once again. So we're going to have several speakers who will talk about that legislation. And then we'll follow that with a presentation by Ellie Confrist from Courier News, who's going to talk to us about how we can actively participate in combating misinformation online, both about this vouchers legislation and about other matters that we object to, some of the bad ideas and bad bills that we are confronting at this point in Iowa and other states around the country. I did want to give you a heads up that we think our program will run until about 8 o'clock tonight. So we hope that you can stay with us until Jane Cranston takes it away at 8 o'clock at the end of our program. So I'd like to briefly introduce our 3 speakers on the vouchers legislation. And with my apologies to these illustrious speakers, I'm going to keep these introductions very brief because I want them to have the floor for as long a time as possible. Our first speaker is Senator Janice Weiner, newly elected to the Iowa Senate. So she's currently on the ground in the fight to stop the vouchers legislation and other bad ideas and bills proposed by the Senate majority. Janice served as a diplomat in the Foreign Service for 26 years, and most recently was a member of the Iowa City Council. So I think you would agree with me that she has a great deal of experience to bring to the current situation and the debates in the Iowa Senate. Our second speaker on the vouchers legislation is Mary Masher. Mary taught for 33 years in the Iowa City schools and was elected to the Iowa House in 1994, where she was a strong advocate for women, children, and families for many years. Before her retirement from the House at the end of 2022, last year, she had the opportunity to fight against the vouchers legislation as an elected representative, and she joins us tonight to help continue that fight. Our third speaker is Margaret Buckton, legislative analyst for the Urban Education Network and a partner at Iowa Schools Finance Information Services. The UEN, the Urban Education Network, is a consortium of Iowa's largest public school districts, which helps to support the unique needs of urban public schools, as well as to address issues related to all public schools. Margaret joins us tonight to present the basic outline of the schools vouchers legislation and to talk about how it will harm Iowa's schools. Before I turn it over to Janice, I would like to say that we are hoping that all of you here tonight are here because you want to help take action on this legislation and other legislation that we will be seeing in the coming months. So I hope as you listen to the speakers, you'll be thinking about what your own personal talking points can be as you contemplate a variety of actions, perhaps writing letters to the editor or opinion columns, perhaps writing to legislators, to the governor, or other entities that we'll be hearing about from our speakers. So, just to say, I hope that you are here as an activist and that you use what you hear tonight as a basis for your action in the coming weeks. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Janice.
Thank you very much, Roseanne. So I'm going to, as you noted, I'm new to this, but I'm going to be very brief. I'm essentially just going to outline a couple of the major points in the bill and then hand it off to Mary and Margaret. So but I preface it by saying this bill is much larger than last year's bill, which failed. And that's useful perspective, I think. Last year's had income limits, this does not. So there's essentially three parts. The first part is vouchers, even though the governor disputes that, which that's what they should be called. It's the payment of the full amount of supplemental education monies into an education savings account that a parent would then use to pay the private school or the non-public school, as they're called in this bill. The first year, and they would like to get this going immediately this year, which will also upset the basket horribly for all the school districts they're already almost done working on their budgets. The first year, anyone would be eligible who has income up to 300% of the federal poverty level. The second year, it would move to up to 400% of the federal poverty level. And the third year, there would be no limits. And so essentially, the taxpayers would be funding almost at the current rate, almost $7,600 to a lot of wealthy people. It would be a huge income transfer. There are a whole bunch of things that money could be used for, many of which I'm sure public school parents wish they could have funding to use for. But to me, the most important piece is that that's how they would roll this program out. The funding amounts are unknown. That's an estimated maybe 90 to 100 million the first year, but nobody really knows. And I'm sure someone will talk going forward about the proposed rule in the House, which would make it not subject to scrutiny by the Ways and Means and committee and the Appropriations Committee. The second part is a supposed inducement to public schools, which is an estimated $1,200 per pupil. For a pupil that receives a voucher would, in theory, be sent to the student's home school district. And the third part would be a one-time funding that would allow school districts, but not require school districts to use excess professional development funds, teacher leadership compensation funds, or talented and gifted program funds for a one-time teacher salary supplement. So those are the aspects of the bill. This bill was introduced this past Tuesday evening as Senate Study Bill 1022 and House Study Bill 1. The Senate already had its subcommittee meeting with a lot of public comment on Thursday afternoon. The House is coming up Tuesday at 5 p.m. in the Supreme Court chamber in the Capitol building. And I will just leave it at that and hand it off to the people who really know this.
Hi, everyone. This is Mary Masher, and I just want to, first of all, thank everyone for being a part of this call tonight. You are vital in this discussion and in this debate. And I'm going to start by something very positive. We have great public schools in Iowa. We really do. We have great public school teachers. We have people who are dedicated to making sure that students have a great education and are able to move on if they choose to go to a community college or a four-year institution or whatever career they're choosing. We have basically built our foundation in Iowa on our great public schools. This effort is an attempt to basically destroy our public education in Iowa, which is why we have so many people interested and alarmed at this proposal. It is being funded by dark money and out-of-state interest. ALEC, which is the Alliance for Legislative, it's a conservative think tank that has been sponsoring this legislation across the country, is part of the reason why we have this model language. And again, this model language would in essence be an enormous shift from our public school students, because obviously any money that is from the general fund that goes to private school students is money that is not available for our public schools. And quite frankly, over the last years, we have been starving our public schools. We have been not increasing the funding available to them in the state budget, even though we've had surpluses available to do that. So it's unfortunate that we see this disintegration of support for public education in this state and across the country, but especially after this past election. But I do not want people to go away thinking that this is a done deal. It is not. And we have House members who have fought this legislation in the past. It may be a done deal in the Senate. It is not in the House. And I know Margaret's going to be talking more about that in terms of what you and I and everybody can be doing to contact legislators and to let people know why this is so devastating to rural Iowa, and especially our students who are in public schools. Obviously, we do not have the same oversight of public schools that we do private schools. And so, sorry, I'll back that up. We do not have the oversight over private schools that we do public schools. And by that, I mean we have local elected school boards who are accountable to the public. There is not an elected school board, a public school board, accountable to the public in our private schools. And so they can choose who they do and don't want to teach. If they have a student who's disruptive or they feel is not a fit for their population, they can expel that student. And those students end up in our public school systems. The public schools do not have the ability to do that. We teach all, and we try to accommodate every child with their specific needs. So I look at that in terms of just the overall education that a child gets in private versus public school. And you can see why it is so important for us to fund our public schools and to make sure that all children have the ability to learn and grow and obviously use those educational efforts for their next step in terms of whether they go to community college or four-year public. The thing that I think is really critical here is we have been able to defeat this in the past. And we did that by engaging our rural legislators who also saw what it would do to their rural schools. Obviously, they don't have private schools in their areas. In rural Iowa, especially in lots of locations throughout the state, there's not a private school to go to. So we know that's not even a possibility, it's a moot point. And every child in Iowa does have a choice, and the parents have a choice on whether they want to send their children to a private or a public school, or whether to homeschool them. We already have school choice in Iowa. It's a matter of who foots the bill. And in this particular legislation, they would now shift that to the state, and we would be paying for those private school students. So it would be an enormous break for very wealthy Iowans. Think about this, people who are millionaires, people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year would be getting the benefit of this, because in essence, she's got the 300% of poverty level the first year, 400% the second, and then no limit on the third year. So again, we're looking at an enormous tax break, an enormous cut to those that are wealthiest in the state. So I'm going to turn this over to Margaret. Margaret's kind of my guru. There are 33,000 private school students in the state of Iowa, approximately, and about 475,000 public school students. So you do the math on that. And obviously, if we're looking at over $7,000 going to private school students, that's an enormous price tag over the years that would be funded. And it's another reason why this is an opportune time for us to say no. Vouchers is not in the best interest of our state. It is not in the best interest of our students. And in Iowa, we value our public schools and won't let this go without a fight. So I'm going to turn it over to Margaret, and Margaret's got some great slides and statistics. I know she'll make that available to people on this call, so you're able to utilize that with others if you choose to do so. So Margaret, take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I'll always call you Representative Masher. I think we were in the legislature. I was legislative staff starting in 1994 session. It was about the time you started. So I will miss you terribly up there. I'm going to stick through these slides so that I get as much information to you as quickly as possible. There is this new unprecedented education reform committee in the House. And this committee, made up of leadership of both the Republicans and the Democrats, is going to consider this, whether you call it education savings accounts or vouchers, it is the exact same thing. It's taking public money that in this case goes to the parent, and then the parent pays tuition with it. The proposed rules for this committee would be any legislation that comes out of this committee would not have to go through either appropriations or Ways and Means. And that could seem like a way to fast track it. I think what that does is creates a lot of opportunity to talk to legislators, but only very quickly, because if they get through this committee quickly, it could be to the floor without those usual stops where you get to talk to more and more people. And then Ed, I'm going to move through these slides pretty quickly here. So if you go to the next one. Okay, I wanted to just take a bird walk and talk about public school funding for just a second. So on the chart on the next slide, and this is exactly what Representative Masher was talking about. Well, it's the next one, but I'm going to talk about this first. Last year's legislature passed historic tax cuts, and I've circled the impact that comes out of the nonpartisan legislative staff explanation of the bill for the tax cuts. The balance sheet in fiscal 27 shows that our state revenue will go down $1.8 billion. So even though we have a couple of billion in the bank right now, it's not going to take very long before very expensive programs, whether it's this voucher program or property tax cuts the legislature will consider this year. If you're spending $300 to $400 million a year on this program, and that's the cost when it's phased in, pretty soon we're going to be up against the legislature having to make priority decisions. In the last 10 years, and that's what you'll see on the next slide, we have seen very low increases in the amount of funding per student. So this slide tells you the percent increase per pupil since the beginning of our foundation formula back in the 70s. And if you can't even see the font, you can tell the direction of that line that our average has really plummeted in the last 14 years. And indeed, in the 12 of the last 13 years, this increase per pupil has been set less than the cost of doing the business of school. And what I mean by that is to pay staff and pay for insurance benefits increases and fuel for buses, even if you have the same number of students, if you get a 2% or 2.5% increase, you're having to cut the budget. If you have fewer students, you're having to cut the budget even further. And I think this underfunding of public education over the last 10 years in particular has set up the surpluses now available to pay for the private school tuition that's being talked about in this bill. I've got statistics in the next 3 or 4 slides I'm not going to go into. They'll be there for your information just to show how much we have lagged the rest of the country in educational funding, ranking 40th nationally from 2014 to 2019. And then on the next slide, we're now $1,536 below the national average in our per pupil funding. So we rank 30th in the nation. Now, we have some people that look back to our past and they say the glory days when we were #1 in the nation in our NAEP scores, that's the National Assessment of Education Progress, and wish that it would be like that again. You know, in the 70s and 80s, Iowa spent more per pupil than the national average. And when we got to the end of 89, beginning of 90, that's when we started to fall behind. So it's not surprising we were spending more than the national average. Our test scores were better because we were able to compensate teachers at a higher level. We were able to have great programs for our students. And now it gets harder to do that. And I could give you 10 slides on teacher pay. I just don't have time tonight to do that. So what does the money buy? What it really buys, and this is something that when I talk about this with folks in both the Urban Education Network, and then I also am the professional advocate for the Rural School Advocates of Iowa, and that's 175 rural districts, is how do you use language that folks that you're talking to can understand and resonates with them? And it hasn't been working very well to say we don't have enough money in schools. So we really have to get down to what does the money buy? And it's about having class sizes so every student gets individual attention. It's about having opportunities for career and technical education programs or fine arts. Calculating a return on investment. We've got college credits or credentials earned in high school, and how much did that save parents and college students going forward? And got people potentially into a credentialed job faster, contributing to the revenue growth of the state and the state's economic success. And in case you don't know, about 80% of our school district budgets are spent on staff. So that sets up this conversation about school choice in Iowa. And there's a little history here. We've gone through the last 3 years of expanding access to choice by eliminating voluntary diversity plans. And in 5 of our districts, 3 of those are largest urban centers in Iowa that regulated open enrollment out of the district to avoid concentrated minority and poverty within the district. The reason I mention this one is because in other states where they have voucher plans or education savings accounts, they see concentrated minority and poverty in those places that have the vouchers most prevalent. So you think about Detroit or Miami-Dade. We've created charter schools. We eliminated a deadline for open enrollment, doubled the tuition and textbook tax credit so parents that pay tuition to private schools can write some of that off on their taxes, and increased the school tuition organization tax credits to $20 million annually, and expanded the amount of credit that parents can, or that contributors can take for that. That particular program is actually targeted at our lower income families. And when I say lower income, it at least has an income threshold. It's the 400% federal poverty level, less than $111,000 a year of annual income. So our non-public school enrollment has dropped since the mid-2000s and got down to as low as 30,000. It spiked up a little bit in the year of COVID, potentially because in some places, especially urban centers where we had a lot of students in crowded classrooms and couldn't guarantee health and safety for our staff and students, some of the private schools were having full-time school. But it's come back down about 3,000 since then. This is the map that proves what Representative Masher told you. Any place that is a school district with a white background in this map has no private school buildings in that school district. And the gray is only one. So that entire almost third or lower southwest quadrant has very little private school. So it's not surprising to us that those rural Republicans and those legislators have been concerned about such a big investment that is a shift of wealth from the ability to fund our rural schools to providing parents in more urban centers with this kind of economic relief, whether or not they need it. This is just the chart on that school tuition organization tax credit, which has gone up at a much higher rate than funding for our public schools has now at $20 million. And about that tax credit, it is interesting that it exists in places where we have private schools, and it shows you there that that income level, the median income of recipients of that tax credit now of the scholarship is about $44,000. So that is going toward those families of need. And what I've suggested that people who talk to their legislators ask, or when talking to folks over the backyard fence, or when you're having coffee, is how many of our current public school parents have asked their legislators for this bill so they can get out of their public school. And that gets back to the, this is coming from somewhere else, not from Iowa. Most of the legislators I've talked to have said zero. That's not who's asking for it. And I'll get to that in just a minute. This is interesting too. We added up all of the money already spent on private schools that is supported by state, either tax credits or appropriations. And a couple of different years of data in here, depending on what kind of information it is. But the total last year was $83 million already spent on private schools. And so I always ask when I see legislation like this, what problem are we trying to solve? If we already have scholarships for low-income families, where does the barrier exist if they really want to go to a private school? Advocates for choice. So this is that question for every legislator. How many public schools constituent parents have asked for this proposal? Typically, the advocates are parents of current private school students who are highly financially motivated for the state to pay this tuition. There are also homeschool families who come to all of the subcommittee meetings and they say, yes, and when you get it in place, we have to expand it because I need that relief too. There is a statement that I've heard where somebody who sends their child to a private school or homeschool says, but I pay taxes and my children don't benefit. I think that comes from the wrong place. Public education is about the public good, that we can't afford to live with our neighbors' children uneducated, that it is the right and moral thing to do. And that public good is so important for us to have a working democracy. But when you think about the analogies for why this bill doesn't make sense, you know, if there's a member of a private golf club, do they get to ask the city to pay their dues since they pay taxes for city parks that they never use? Or a person with a $5 million house hires their own security staff. Does she get to withhold the taxes she would otherwise pay for the county sheriff or the local police? And the answer is no. Just because you have access to things you might choose differently doesn't mean you are no longer responsible for contributing to that public good. We're all in it together, whether that's health and safety or making sure that our neighbors' children are educated. The National Coalition for Public Education has some really good graphics and information about this. When they talk about who benefits from school vouchers in states that have had them the longest, the strong majority are folks that have already chosen private schools. It's not somebody who's coming in from a public school trying to escape that. And I go back to what Mary said to begin this. We have really good public schools in Iowa, and we have perfect school choice because we have open enrollment to any neighborhood public school. There's also been some research information about how vouchers impact student outcomes. And it's met on the scale, it's as harmful as natural disasters in some places. The interruption of learning that was in Hurricane Katrina or the COVID-19 pandemic isn't as big as that from the Louisiana vouchers or the Ohio vouchers in terms of students who were in a public school, went to a private school, and actually did worse. So the fiscal impact of the governor's plan. The governor's materials estimate, I don't know why there's a dollar sign there, it's 14,000 students will receive this education savings account in the first year. And they probably have some data on those below 300% of the federal poverty level, but they also assume all incoming kindergartners, and then they assume a few students who might leave the public school and go to private. But the way the bill is written, I think that students who are currently homeschooled would also qualify. Last year's legislation said you had to be in a public school for at least 2 semesters to qualify. This year it says you can't have been in a private school for the private 2 semesters. That would also count homeschool students. Now that almost $8,000 there per ESA, that's the regular program cost, but there's other money that also is generated for public schools based on counting enrollment. Things like dropout prevention money or instructional support, or even the statewide penny for school infrastructure. So Iowa School Finance Information Services, the other place that I wear a hat, we've estimated this to cost the average public school $10,500 lost revenue per student. And then they have the opportunity to keep that $1,202, some categorical funds, for the student of resident who goes to the private school. And in that situation, you still are going to lose over $8,500 for each student that's gone. So should rural communities be concerned? First of all, Iowa has a huge teacher shortage, and our rural schools feel the brunt of that. If private schools expand, where are they going to get a new physics or a calculus teacher or a fine arts teacher? They're likely to come from rural schools that pay just a little bit less than our urban centers. And it turns out that our private schools pay a little bit less than our urban centers do, at least now. But if they get a voucher for almost $8,000, maybe the end result is going to be increasing tuition so they can actually pay teachers more and attract teachers from all of our public schools. If rural schools you lose even just a few students, those tight budgets will demand reduced programs and staff for the majority of students who remain. And our Rural School Advocates of Iowa, representing 175 rural school districts, opposed every proposal in the last 2 years, even though those both had ideas that would give money directly to rural schools. In this case, that $1,202 that the public school retains, that doesn't help a rural school, any of those rural schools that have no private schools in their backyard, because they don't get to keep that unless a student leaves. So it's worse funding for our rural schools than either of the prior 2 iterations of this proposal. What about urban communities? Most of the private schools are in urban communities. So urban public schools are likely to experience the greatest drain of students and resources. The communities with diversity, that's both socioeconomic status or poverty and racial diversity and voucher states, see increased segregation and concentration of poverty, as those voucher recipients typically come from the wealthier part of those communities. And there are examples where urban centers around the country that have vouchers actually had to consolidate programs and close neighborhood schools. Some could make a really good argument that if my neighborhood school is closed in my urban center, then I as a parent have less choice as to where my student can go. So oversight, and this was mentioned also, the bill that we have proposed here in Iowa has the least amount of oversight of any program I've seen. At least in Florida, they have to ensure that all staff submit to background checks. They have to return any funds for which services were not provided. In this bill, there are no funds that come back to the public school from the private school if they don't do anything correctly. Florida administers state assessments or norm reference tests for all students attending via the scholarship annually. This bill from Governor Reynolds now requires the state assessment. Now, why I tell you that I don't think this is very good oversight of the quality of the program is because any student who's not going to do well on these tests is likely counseled out of the private school long before they take the test. So my guess is by the time we get full phase in of this program, the students that are tested are going to do all right. The public schools are going to have the concentrated kids of poverty and kids with special needs. In Florida, if a school gets more than $250,000 from education savings accounts, they have to submit to a private audit. And there's nothing like that in this bill. This is legislation directly out of the bill from last year, but the same legislation is in this year's proposal that actually says, I love this at the bottom of the page, that the private school is to be given the maximum freedom possible to provide for the educational needs of the school's students. And I sure wish our public schools had that maximum freedom, or at least had a level playing field.
Margaret,
yeah.
Margaret, I'm going to just ask you, how much more time do you need for this? Or
I'm just about done. I'm just about done. I was
great.
just going to say this is my last slide that I wanted to share.
Okay,
is that
great.
if we were to take $300 million and invest it in something else that would make a big difference, preschool, full-day preschool for our kids in poverty or for our non-English speaking students would make so much more sense and have a better turn on investment than what this particular proposal is going to do. And so whenever I have a chance to talk about that, I get that in the mix as well. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. I did see one in the text that talk about what is the definition of a private school in this bill. And it does refer back to Iowa code that it is an accredited private school, but our private schools are often not accredited by the state. They have alternative accrediting agencies. And that's why they aren't required to have licensed teachers or background checks for their employees or other things that our public schools must have.
Well, what I want to take a minute and thank you so much. In the interest of getting Ellie a chance to do her presentation, I want to move on, but first I want to say I loved your presentation, Margaret. I hope I wish everybody could see it somehow. It's just superb. It's so much good information. Thank you very much. And
you bet. And I'm happy to share the PowerPoint with anybody. I know I sent it to Ed so he can distribute it to you all if you can get it that way too.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. And
Jane, if I could just jump in here, since we are recorded, Potluck Insurgency has a YouTube channel. And so we will be posting this recording on our YouTube channel in the next day or two. So all of the slides that Margaret showed tonight will be available on that. And I'll let everybody know when that's available.
We can try to get those out in an email too, because I know you said you had slides that weren't able to use. And is Mary still on? Oh, there she is. Hi, Mary. Mary, you are, you know that I'm a huge fan. You're just one of my heroes. I don't know how you speak so passionately without any notes on all these different subjects. Thank you very much. It was wonderful. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to talk about what we can do to advocate, because that is really the butt of the bud, is how we can get this stopped. First of all, these are in the chat and I'll have them sent out with the slides. Contact your legislator by email or phone. You just have to go to it's the website that's right there. It's very easy to do. I think people who signed up for this are probably politically savvy, but you would know that it's a 5-minute deal, 2-minute deal, actually, if you're just going to make it simple. But you can write to them and you can phone them that way. That is probably the most essential thing, is to let them know. Also, on Tuesday, January 17th at 5 p.m., there is a public hearing. Everybody can register your opposition to the bill online, which is a wonderful thing to do. Very satisfying too, I might add. So I hope that you'll take that opportunity to do that, as well as letting your legislators know. They're telling us to contact Kim Reynolds. I don't know how much good that would do, but I do think these things have an impact. Whatever you do, it seems to me that it comes back and we hear that there's an impact. Write a letter to the editor. People are very shy about this, but it's amazing. And they usually publish letters, and it's very fun. So I know there's so many teachers on, if you could write about your own experience, it's an easy process to do. And I put a website there that has how to get in touch with the 10 biggest newspapers in the state. Great resources are the PTA, the NEA, and I'm drawing a blank, ISEA. So those are wonderful, wonderful information on how to advocate. And I hope everybody will do something. If you haven't done it already, do something else. So it's just really, really important. And now I don't think I have time to take questions. Roseanne, could I just take a few, do you suppose?
I think that would be fine. If people could be very brief in stating their questions, let's take a few.
Okay, that would be great. What I'd like you to do, it's very confusing to kind of go through the chat and prioritize it. So what I'd like you to do is raise your hand, and you can do that by going down to the toolbar on the bottom and click on reaction, and then up will pop a little button that says raise your hand. And that way I can see in order everybody who has a question. I would ask that you keep your questions very, very brief so that we can get as many people an opportunity to ask their question. Eileen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I put my question in the chat. I'll just read it quick. Reynolds says the cost per student in Florida is less than Iowa and performance is better. That's part one. And others have said that in states with voucher programs, public schools have not suffered. And I would like to hear a fact check on these points.
So in Florida, the year that they passed their voucher plan, they also passed mandatory third grade retention. So students in third grade who weren't reading proficiently had to stay in third grade. So they are not tested in the NAEP pool, the National Assessment of Education Progress, in comparison with Iowa fourth graders, for example. They also allowed students with disabilities who have an individual education program to go to private schools. When I last checked, now last year, they had about 69,000 students with disabilities now in private schools, also not tested by NAEP. So when you remove special education and non-proficient readers from your testing pool, it looks like your scores improve. That doesn't mean those students are reading better. And so when I looked at 8th grade reading, comparing Iowa regular education students with Florida regular education students, our students were 1 scale score point higher than the Florida students. But I don't know if it's deceitful. It's an accurate statement that their test scores are better, but they're not testing the same students or the students most challenged. So that's the first thing. When it comes to funding, also our students with disabilities are the most expensive students in the whole education context. So if those students are removed from the pool, many of those students had their parents sign waivers that they would not receive special education services, and that makes the delivery of education just a little bit cheaper.
Okay, thank you so much. Emily, would you like to ask your question?
There's a little bit of confusion about this bill as to whether it covers homeschoolers or people who are not necessarily sending their kid to a school. Can they get their expenses or maybe even pay themselves to teach their children?
So the bill specifically says it has to be enrolled, the student has to be enrolled in an accredited private school. Now, it's the State Board of Education under the executive branch that gets to approve alternative crediting agencies. So if our state board were to say, if you had a pod of 4 homeschool families and called that, Mrs. Smith's 42nd Street School, if there was an accrediting agency, maybe the Homeschool Association of America has a checklist of this is what you have to do in order to be accredited, then it's possible that without legislative action, this could expand to either homeschool students like that, or maybe some other kind of private school that doesn't yet exist and isn't accredited. I know one of the questions that Eileen asked before was about rural schools not being harmed. The other thing that happened in Florida, in the 30 least populated, most rural counties, there are now 69 private schools that didn't exist before, because it creates a profit motive to come in and create a private school. They might be small. They might get just enough off of that $8,000 a student to have a couple of sections of high school. And what happens to those schools around then may be different where you are. In Florida, they don't have small school districts. They only have 3 districts below 1,000 students. In Iowa, we have over 110 districts below 500 students. So for us, we would have our rural schools facing closure, not being able to meet accreditation requirements as a result. But all of that is what happens next with what the executive branch does in creating approved accreditation agencies.
Thank you.
Okay, and Mavis, is that Mavis?
Well, that's my wife.
I kind of figured as I sort of did a double take on that one. My apologies. And I think this will have to be our last question, sadly.
Lucky. My question is, if you go to a public school, you have transportation. Now, when I take my $7,000 as a or disadvantaged family, do I have transportation to the private school?
You muted, Margaret.
I don't know why I pushed that button. You do not get transportation. And actually the bill prohibits this from being paid for transportation. So transportation has to come from somewhere else. I think that is one of the biggest barriers, especially in places where you're 2 or 3 districts away from where a private school is. And a lot of people don't know this. For our students from low-income families who do open enroll into a neighboring public school, they actually do have transportation provided. So it's not necessarily a barrier for our public school open enrollment exercise of choice, but it sure might be for private.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Roseanne, do you want to? I'm sorry, Richard, we just ran out of time. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. We have such an ambitious program tonight. I really appreciate so many of you are here to hear what all of us have to say. Just a reminder that we hope to wrap up around 8 o'clock, so hope you can stick with us. Clearly, there's a lot of misinformation swirling around about the impact of this legislation. So we invited Ellie Confrist to join us tonight. She's with Courier News, which owns and operates the Iowa Starting Line, which many of you have heard of. Courier News is a civic media company whose mission is to protect and strengthen our democracy with credible, fact-based journalism that seeks to create a more informed, engaged, and representative America. They deliver most of their content online using social platforms and work to cut through online disinformation to provide quality coverage from credible resources. Ellie tonight is going to help, or is going to ask us, enlist us to help in that effort. I wanted to mention that Pat Reinert is the founder and editor of Courier News. So many of you who are on the Potluck Insurgency membership list may remember that we did host Pat for a presentation, I think it was last spring. So we have had an introduction to the work of Courier News. Now, Ellie, who's joining us tonight, is the Community Development Director for Courier News, and she is going to talk to us about how we can help fight some of the disinformation that's swirling around about the voucher legislation and other, as I keep saying, bad ideas that we're going to be looking at in the next few months. So I'm going to turn it over to Ellie at this point.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Roseanne. I just wanted to take a minute and thank everyone for being here tonight for such an important issue. You know, a lot of the people here, I'm so honored to be here and to be speaking with all these people that I honestly have been listening to and looking up to my whole life. So very excited to be here. Yes, as Roseanne said, I am the social media and community manager with Iowa Starting Line, which is a branch of Courier Newsroom. So I'm kind of going to, this is a good info messengers training, which I'll get into what that means exactly in a little bit. But essentially, our goal and my specific goal within that organization is to create social media content to help combat misinformation online. And I'll explain a little bit about how we do that and what that means. So as a quick briefer, Roseanne did a great job about what Courier Newsroom is. In case you were curious, Iowa Starting Line became part of Courier Newsroom a couple of years ago, but there are 7 other properties in 7 other states, all of which are battleground states, important states for political, national things that are happening nationally. We reach millions of passive news consumers. I'll get into what that means in a little bit as well. But essentially, our goal is to reach people online who are most likely to be impacted by misinformation because they are less likely to be actively seeking out good quality information. So our goal is to reach them where they are. They spend their time online, so that's where we spend most of our time as well. And in the end, our ultimate goal is to mobilize them to vote in line with their values and with progressive values in general. So you can go on to yep, perfect. So we do that in a couple of different ways. We are telling the truth, right? We're providing good, quality, truthful information through our news channels. We do that in a couple of different ways. For example, we distill kind of political jargony, kind of wonk-ish news stories and information that's coming out of either the legislature or during election cycles. And we kind of translate them down and distill them to help make clear the local impacts of the policy and to really help humanize what's happening at the State House or what's happening in DC. We connect the dots between current threats, things that are impacting real Iowans in real life, with elected officials that are on their ballot every single year, and their representatives that are in Des Moines or that are in DC. We show people who those electeds really are, what they stand for. We hold them accountable, make a real deliberate effort to hold them accountable for what they do and what they say, remind them what's at stake, and most importantly, provide information on how people can take action and how they can vote. So you can go, yep. So I want to start off by, we had a great presentation on the issues with vouchers. So I don't want to spend too much time dwelling in the negative here, but it's important to recognize the problem that we're up against, right? So why does this matter? Why does the work we're doing here matter? Millions of people nationally and tons of people in Iowa specifically are primarily reached by right-wing misinformation online. These people are often passive news consumers. So if you're here tonight, it's probably not you. You're probably here and you're engaged and you're seeking out good quality information. But there are so many Iowans that are kind of tuned out in one way or the other, right? And when they're tuned out, they kind of just see what pops up on their Facebook feeds. And the people that are on their Facebook feeds more than anybody else are right-wing media outlets and disinformation super spreaders. The real way that they access these people online is through incidental exposure. So these people don't go out looking for this and misinformation, but it's what pops up on their feed for a multitude of reasons. Collectively, progressives have kind of responded by investing in huge, million-dollar ad buys and digital buys, TV buys. In general, those have been proven pretty ineffective against misinformation. So what Courier is trying to do is to reach people where they're at and take a new approach to combating misinformation. So there's a couple reasons why that's necessary, right? I think everyone here knows how much of a crisis a lot of local news is in right now. 1,500 newspapers have folded in the last 10 years. A lot of the ones that haven't folded were bought by corporations or by hedge funds that prioritize profits over local impact reporting. TV news has become a Sinclair nightmare. 72% of American households see the conservative Sinclair media organization as their trusted local news channel. So that's a problem, right? Even the places that traditionally they were able to turn to for fact-based quality information are turning into essentially places for conservatives to churn out their beliefs and their ideas. And a lot of times paywalls leave people feeling alienated, right? People who aren't actively looking for this information online will click on a story. If it's paywalled, they won't be able to access it and they don't get that good quality information. So a lot of those things are what we're trying to combat. And so our solution is to ultimately change the info environment that people are living in. So we're trying to build a media ecosystem. We're in Iowa, we're focused on doing this through Iowa Starting Line and different properties in the different states that we have as well. But what that means is that we're meeting Americans where they're spending their time. That's on social media, that's in their email, that's on their phones. And we're trying to provide them with the information that they need to be informed and to be engaged citizens and voters. We're providing that to where they are, right? It's simply not enough to just kind of be on Facebook anymore. We need to be active every single day. We need to earn their trust, and we need to provide them with quality content that is easily digestible and easy for people to understand. So we kind of do that in a couple of different ways. We have a kind of a model that we're using nationally. And if you've been reading Iowa Starting Line for a few years, since before they became part of Courier Newsroom, you might have noticed a bit of change in our content in the last couple of years. That's very deliberate. This is because the number one thing we are trying to do, the very first step in reaching people online, is by building trust. So the passive news consumers that we're trying to reach are people who have largely tuned out politics. They don't go out looking for, for news stories. They don't go intentionally reading things about what's happening at the State House. They're kind of shut off from all of that for many different reasons. So what we're trying to do is we're kind of trying to start by creating a relationship with passive news consumers that isn't based in politics. So we're trying to reach people through kind of fun content, stuff about different places you can go that have historic hotels in Iowa, maybe songs that have, connections to Iowa in some way. We provide daily history content and kind of free engagement content in an effort to grab people's attention, build their trust, and then ultimately cultivate community over time, right? Even if people aren't actively looking for political news, if they're curious enough about Iowa history to come to Iowa Starting Line's Facebook page every day and see what we posted about history that day, they're going to believe that we are a trusted messenger, essentially, for good quality news. And hopefully, as we build trust over time, they'll come back for the kind of impact content that we all know is so important. So that's the big first step. The second step is kind of delivering the vegetables, right? Delivering the content that Iowans need. We start by creating these relationships through fun content, lifestyle content, and then we kind of deliver the necessary impact content. Since this is generally a presentation about school vouchers, I've actually just pulled a couple of examples of impact posts that we've produced on Facebook just this week, actually, about school vouchers specifically. So we had a story that we posted that kind of broke down what's different about the voucher bill this year compared to years past. This in the middle here is we live streamed the entire Senate subcommittee meeting for our followers and for anyone online who wanted to see. And the goal with that was to create more transparency, right? Hopefully these people who have been engaged with our content in other ways, would maybe see that we're live streaming something that's happening live at the State House and might be interested in seeing what that's all about. So once we have that audience established, we can start delivering this kind of content. That's coverage of political races, coverage of, issues that are happening at the legislature, and progressive things that are going wrong, essentially, that will really impact their lives and the future of democracy in general. So that's kind of step 2. Step 3 is where we've actually started to see some results. So we're really excited to say that, Courier nationally has had boosted news programs in 2020, 2021, and 2022. There was actually one through Iowa Starting Line in Iowa in 2022, where we were boosting content specifically about the Democratic primaries that were happening back in May and June. That's when we were kind of boosting that content. And it's really exciting that we found that there's actually a statistically significant impact on turnout with these low propensity voters when they are exposed to our content. So, these people who are often neglected by campaigns, maybe they're not coming to events, they're not answering the door when they knock, they're not picking up the phone. They're seeing the content that we are putting out there online about things that are happening in their real life. And that actually translated into more people turning out to vote, which is really exciting. So that's kind of our model, how we focus on doing it from our end. And this is kind of where hopefully you come in, where things get a little bit more you can take some action, hopefully, and maybe are a little inspired. That's our Good Info Messengers program. So overall, we are trying to reshape the media ecosystem, right? But we know we're trying to scale this very quickly. We're trying to get our content out there very quickly, kind of exponentially almost. And so what we're focusing on is a grassroots movement of good info messengers. That's kind of a program that I run in Iowa of local volunteers, people who help spread our content and content from mission-aligned organizations, other progressive organizations, so that good quality content is on as many people's news feeds as possible. So that's why messengers matter. And I want to go through a little bit about what that, on the next slide, a little bit about what that looks like. So we're in general trying to go on offense. So if you decide to become a good info messenger, or you decide that an organization that you work with would be interested in working with us on helping to distribute content, that means that we're going on the offensive against misinformation, right? So combating misinformation by debunking is really, really important work. There are tons of great journalists across the state that are doing that. We spend some time doing that as well. But what we're trying to really do here is not just fight back against the negative misinformation, but also make sure that we are flooding social media with good quality news. We're not just playing catch up, right, with right-wing extremists. We're not just playing catch up with people that are pushing misinformation about school vouchers on social media. Instead, we are producing the actual news, what's actually happening, the facts of the situation about school vouchers, about, anti-abortion bills that are coming up at the state legislature, anti-LGBTQ bills that are coming up, anti-labor bills. Although these are a lot of the areas that we're really focusing on. And the goal is to kind of proactively define those narratives instead of just responding to the negative misinformation, right? So there's a couple different ways that can look like if you decide to be a volunteer, to get involved with Good Info Messengers in any way. So on the next slide, the first is going to be engagement. This is super, super easy and something that I assume a lot of you are doing already. It's literally just engaging, like liking and commenting on posts that Iowa Starting Line posts, that mission-aligned organizations that we work with post to help boost them in the newsfeed. Funnily enough, we have found that on Facebook actually prioritizes the most extreme reactions. Not sure if anyone has noticed this on Facebook, but love reactions and angry reactions tend to boost posts in the algorithm the most. So an example of a shift that we ask volunteers to do is just to literally go and react to 10 Iowa Starting Line posts a week with either the love react or the angry react if it's something they're not happy about. That boosts them higher up in the algorithm chain and make sure that more and more people are seeing them on their feeds. So that's one, but pretty much like the lowest lift, lowest effort way you can possibly get involved, but it really helps, right? We don't have bots that are kind of doing the work that a lot of right-wing organizations do. So we're relying on a true grassroots movement to boost that good quality content. So that's the kind of the first overarching way that people can help. The second is going to be sharing. Again, very simple and very easy, hopefully, if you're on social media already. That's literally just kind of sharing our news or content from our partner organizations on your personal social channels. So whether that's sharing a post on Facebook, posting something to your Instagram story, or sharing, even DMing it to a group or sharing it in a Facebook group that you're a part of, by elevating that content, good quality news and good quality content on your personal social channels, right off the bat, you're exposing essentially everyone in your friends list, everyone that follows you to that kind of content incidentally. So already that's all of those people are incidentally exposed, even if they wouldn't go out searching for that content. But also kind of in a longer term way, you're elevating content as a trusted messenger, right? They trust you. Obviously they do, otherwise they wouldn't be friends with you or they wouldn't follow you on these platforms. So when you share this content, they see that someone that they know, that they trust, believes these kinds of things, believes it's important to share these kinds of things, and then hopefully will go on to do so themselves. That's kind of the second overarching thing we ask. I think generally with shifts for sharing, we ask for like 3 shares a week. Pretty simple there as well. The third kind of big category is just having conversations, right? It's really important that we are engaging with people that might not be actively involved. These passive news consumers, we're trying to build relationships with them, right? It's not just about sharing the content, kind of throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's really about making sure we're building a community of people who believe that good quality information should be shared and who believe in the kinds of progressive values that we all here believe in. So if you're seeing that certain people are liking, commenting, or sharing on the kind of content that you're sharing a lot, that provides you opportunities to talk to them, to reach out via DM maybe, to learn about where they're coming from, what they think about these kinds of topics, and to perhaps encourage them to get involved as well. We also tend to offer in-depth trainings on kind of how to create those productive interactions online. That can be something that can be really difficult, I'm sure we all know, to actually make sure that those conversations, those interactions you're having with people online are productive and helpful and quality. So we offer some tips and suggestions on that in a toolkit that we provide as well. So that's kind of the third big chunk of things that we do. And then there's one more that we've kind of started to focus on more recently and can involve you as an individual or the groups that you're involved with. So that's building a feedback loop. So part of that is reporting back to us, having those kinds of relational organizing conversations that and telling us what you're hearing from people that you're sharing your content with. Maybe you keep sharing stuff and they're like, we loved that live stream of that Senate subcommittee hearing. We want to see more of that. And us hearing that information is really, really great, because then we can better provide the kind of content and the kind of news that people are really looking for, and that really helps kind of turn the tide. So that's part of it. We also work really closely with mission-aligned organizations. I'm here tonight because Potluck Insurgency is a mission-aligned organization with Courier Newsroom and with Iowa Starting Line. I know that a lot of you are really, really involved in your communities and in organizations locally as well. So I want to take this moment to say too, if you are on a board, or you run an organization, or you're even just a member of an organization that you think similarly aligns with us, with Potluck Insurgency, with a lot of county Democratic groups or local labor organizations, I would love to kind of set up a feedback loop. And what that looks like is basically just, let's say that it's a local organization focused on public education, right? Because that's what we're focusing on tonight. If you ran that kind of organization, I would probably, at the end of the week, I produce all of our social content on Starting Line. So I would probably take our biggest and most successful pieces, stories, graphics, TikToks, things like that, Facebook videos, and send those to you in like an email, like 3 or 4 every week. And then you can help by sharing those. And then alternatively, if there's some content, some stories, some information that you really want to make sure gets out there, you can send that to me and we can share that on our social channels as well. So this is the way, working together is really the way that we are hoping to build the kind of media ecosystem that we need to combat misinformation, right? We need to make sure that all of our audience, all of your audiences are seeing that kind of content, seeing that good quality information, and are able to have it's able to have the kind of impact that it really needs to have. So that can look like one of 2 ways, right? If you're an individual, if you're a volunteer with us, a good info messenger, which I'll get to how exactly that works in a minute and what that looks like, then you can just share that content on your personal social channels. That makes a big difference because you have that pre-existing, relationship with people. Alternatively, if you're an organization, or you believe that you are part of an organization that you think could help by sharing this good quality information, you would share that on those channels as well, or maybe share it in Facebook groups that you're a part of, or with email lists. And then hopefully we're getting essentially as many eyes as possible on as much good quality information about progressive issues as possible. That's kind of the idea here. So, next steps are pretty simple. We have a Facebook group dedicated to Good Info Messengers. So I will send the link in there in a second as soon as I'm done with this. If you're just interested in learning more, it's a great way to join, to just kind of see, the kind of content that we're sharing, the way that, that kind of workflow works, how I share content, and then our messengers go out and share it in their personal channels. And then if you belong to an organization, alternatively, that you think might be interested in developing kind of a content sharing feedback loop, I would love to chat with you. I'll send my email address in the chat as well. It's on the next slide as well too. And just feel free to reach out to me. It's literally ellie@iowastartingline.com. So pretty simple, hopefully. And I would love to chat, in a Zoom room or something about what that could look like, what kind of content you're looking for, and how we can all work together to develop a better media ecosystem. So, yes.
Ellie, there's been a few questions in chat. Do you want to take a look? Can you see those and help people out with a few things?
Absolutely. Let me see. We are not currently on LinkedIn. We are on, let me think through all that. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We send email digests, and we're on TikTok as well. That's kind of the new one that we're trying out this year, to see how TikTok videos do, but they're doing very well so far. I think we have several thousand followers. So the best hashtag, great question. It is, that's a great question. We share it. It's hashtag share good info. Let me send it to everyone here. And then in 1 sec, I'll share the ways you can get involved. let me see. Yeah. I think that's all I see. Are there any other questions that I am missing? If you have one, feel free to raise your hand and just I can chat about it more too. Oh yeah. I'm not sure exactly about hashtags about no vouchers. It looks like some people have shared some good ones. We Choose Public Schools is really good. Yeah, I've seen those, and no vouchers is good too, for vouchers specifically. Yeah, Sarah.
Thank you. This is really awesome and ready for you to sign me up. And I'm all about promoting the good news. But I do wonder if this is at the level of going with a little bit of fear mongering is probably needed. And so when we do, supporting you and sharing the good stuff, is there like a rally cry we could all get around that kind of steers some fear? I mean, the background check thing, I think, is like the easiest thing to fear monger, especially with the QAnon crazies thinking there's a pedophile ring. That would be the easiest thing to latch onto. So I'm just wondering if there's a tolerance for that. I don't like doing that, but honestly, I don't know how else we don't fight fire with fire sometimes. So that's a strategy question I just sort of have to the group and to you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll comment on that first. I think generally, I do want to note that good information generally means just correct, truthful. So, a lot of times that's not necessarily positive. So a lot of the kind of good quality information that we're sharing, some of the examples from the content we've done this week, we went through the vouchers bill and kind of compared it to past bills, how it's different, how it's changed. We put out a graphic that came from the figures from the governor about how much it would cost. That's the kind of stuff that generally would not make, that, for example, Governor Reynolds might not put in her speech, but it's still true about the vouchers bill. That's the kind of stuff that we're sharing. So especially when it comes to these kinds of issues, I think we try to share good quality stuff, like good, happy, positive stuff. But a lot of the impact, vegetable content that we're doing, unfortunately, especially these days, is really just kind of speaking truth to power, holding electeds accountable, trying to, get the truth of the matter out in these sorts of situations. So we do a lot of negative sharing of truthful content, as well, in addition to kind of generally positive content. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to speak about generally rallying cries around vouchers, feel free to. I'm going to send the Facebook group and my email really quick in the chat, so that if people are interested in that, they have those links. But
so Ellie, we should let anyone who's on tonight who wants to participate at some level in the actions that you've outlined. Are you saying that you would appreciate those people, individuals, contacting you to let you know what they're interested in doing? Is that?
Yeah. So I'll say this. I'll say if you're interested in kind of personally being a volunteer with Good Info Messengers, sharing our content on your personal channels, a great place to start with that is to be joining that Facebook group. That's how, I stay in direct contact with our volunteers that we've trained so far. We've done a couple of these trainings nationally and in Iowa. To kind of try to get people on board. So if you're personally interested in that, joining the Facebook group is a great place to start. And then if you belong to an organization or run an organization or have any connections with organizations that you think would be interested in partnering with us, so mission aligned organizations, whether that's education specific or really any kind of progressive grassroots organization or labor organization or county party, we're interested in having conversations about that for sure. So I would say if you are looking for a group partnership, reach out to me via email. And anyone can reach out to me via email if you have questions or thoughts or anything like that, of course, all the time. But if you're looking to be a personal volunteer and to share stuff on your personal social media feeds, joining the Facebook group would be a good place to start there. So those are both in the chat now, hopefully, so you can all see them.
Yes, they are there. Any other questions for Ellie about Good News Messengers? Ellie, thank you so much. Great program. And I hope that we have persuaded And we'll follow up with our potluck list and with everyone who was on tonight, but I hope we have persuaded some people to help out. It's an important effort. There's so much, we call it misinformation or disinformation. We really should call it what it is. A lot of it is just plain lies. And
Absolutely.
anything that we can do to counter those lies about so many matters, it's really critical work and something that a lot of us can do, while sitting at home wearing our bunny slippers. So I hope that we'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
I think that too, I hopefully this stuff is really easy to do at home on social media. So that's kind of our hope too, is that we're not asking a ton, it's getting involved with political stuff can often mean several hours of door knocking or making phone calls. We're hoping to provide at least another way to do that. That's lower effort. So if you're interested at all, request to join the Facebook group and I will let you in the next couple of days. And yeah, super excited.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellie. I'm going to turn it back over to Jane for a couple of minutes here before we close it out tonight. So Jane, are you ready to go? Whoops, Jane is muted now. She may not hear me. There she is.
All right, very good. I just want to thank you, Ellie. That was wonderful. And are you out of school? Are you out of college yet?
Yeah, so I started this job after I graduated last May. So yes.
Well, I read some of your articles. They were really fun.
Thank you. It's very sweet.
And thank you for your presentation. I want to thank State Senator Janice Weiner, former State Representative Mary Masher, educational analyst Margaret Buckton, and Ellie Confirst. I hope you will all follow through and advocate against this terrible bill, and also connect with Ellie. And it sounds like there's lots of things we can do to help. This is a perfect time, and we are the right people. So I hope everybody follows through. We could make really good things happen. Thank you all so much for coming. And stay tuned for our next event when we haven't got it planned yet, but we hope that you'll be able to join us next time as well.
Thank you, everyone, very much.